Good morning. Welcome to our Student Success Workshop. Today we're going to be talking about reading. Reading is a huge part of a university student's life. You have reading to do for every class. You have reading to do for assignments in terms of research. You have reading, even test questions involve reading. So it's a huge component. It's what students spend a lot of time having to do. And there's some strategies we're going to talk about today to make that more efficient and effective for you. So my name is Raquel Lado. I work here at Algoma University in the Learning Center as a learning strategist. I'm available to help students one-on-one with any support that you might need academically and in terms of making yourself a better student. So at any time during the school year, please come in and see me. So what are we going to talk about today? So the agenda is university reading, why do the reading, how to schedule the reading, and then we're going to look at a reading strategy that's called SQ4R. So the first point is reading at university. So once you get into your mainstream classes at university, typically you're going to have a chapter to read for every class. Now some classes are going to have a lot more of that, and some classes don't have as much reading. It does depend on what class you're in. So we'll say a sort of typical week at university involves 5 chapters to read. Now that doesn't include research for assignments or anything else, okay? And the idea with this reading for class from your textbooks is that you're going to get this reading done before the class. So how do you find out what to read? When you go to your first day of class, you get a course outline or a course syllabus. Generally on that, you're going to have what I call your reading schedule. And your reading schedule is done up ahead of time by the professor, and it's going to say for week 1 of class, this is what I expect you to read. For week 2 of class, this is what I expect you to read. And generally the whole semester is going to be outlined, and so you'll know right from day 1 how much reading is going to be involved for every class. So for example, if you have, today's Wednesday, if you have a Wednesday night class, on your course outline it will probably say, for this week, let's say you need to read chapter 8. So the professor is going to believe that you have done that reading before you get to class at 7 o'clock tonight. All right? So we want to get it done before we get to class. Now, why do the reading? Here's the thing about reading. You don't usually get a grade for completing the reading. You get a grade for assignments, you get a grade for tests, but you don't really get a grade for reading. And quite truthfully, it tends to be the first thing that gets cut. I don't have time, I'm busy, I'm doing an essay, and therefore I'm not going to do the reading. So it is the first thing that gets cut, but yet it is very important. So why should you do the reading? First of all, it increases your understanding of the topic in the class. So you're going to have an idea as to what the professor is going to talk about. Because you now have an idea of what that class is going to be about, that's going to help you with note-taking. You're going to already have become familiar with some new vocabulary words. You're going to have an idea how those words look. You're going to have an idea how to spell those words. So when you're taking notes, it's going to be a lot easier compared to hearing all of these new terms and new ideas for the very first time. So you're going to be at a little bit better advantage for note-taking. Now, it helps with remembering information. We want to do well on tests and exams, right? Because we know that ultimately our grade is based on tests and exams and assignments. But in doing the reading, it's going to help us be more successful on those tests and exams because it's going to help us remember information. Now, information in a textbook may be presented differently than what the professor does. So the professor could be going over a concept and maybe you don't really understand it. In the textbook, it may be presented in a different way, and when you read it, you're like, oh, okay, now that makes sense. And the last point is really, really important for a lot of classes. It prepares you for class discussions. Now, and I've heard this quite often from professors. A lot of professors in certain classes, sociology is one of them, social work is another one, some psychology classes, some history classes, English classes. When the professor plans out what they're going to do in a particular class, a big part of that may be class discussion. So they are allotting time for class discussion to take place. They want to hear from you. They want to hear what students are thinking about what they're reading. And the class discussion is based on the reading that was assigned. So again, let's say tonight you have a class at 7 o'clock, it's a first-year sociology class. There was some articles that were assigned, maybe part of a chapter in a textbook. Tonight the professor is going to believe that everyone has read that and now a class discussion can take place about that. If you have not read it, it's going to be very difficult to contribute to the class discussion. It's also going to be very apparent that you didn't do the reading. And there may be high participation marks allotted in that class, which means then you're not getting those participation marks, which can then ultimately affect your grade. So preparing you for a class discussion is really important in many classes. So it's an important thing to do to get your reading done. It's something that needs to be thought of every week. You always have reading to do. So scheduling reading. The first week of class in a semester, you get your course outlines from all your professors. Your reading schedule is right there. It's really important to start immediately. Once you fall behind on your reading, there does come a point in time where it's almost impossible to get yourself caught up. So you think 5 chapters this week, 5 chapters next week. If you don't do your reading just for 2 weeks, you're now 10 chapters behind. Well, for many students, that's just not going to happen. They can't catch up that volume of reading. And so then you have to make the decision, well, it doesn't get done, and so I'll just try and catch up where I am, start right now. So when you're looking at scheduling your reading, okay, you don't have to read a chapter in its entirety. For many, many students, starting at page 1 and reading to page 40, you're not really going to remember a lot of what you've read. That's a large chunk of information, okay? So think about it. I need to read this chapter for tonight. It's 40 pages long. What is the best way for me to approach this? So am I just going to divide it up maybe into half or into 3 smaller sections? Also, how familiar with the topic are you? Now, as you go through your years in university, there does sometimes tend to be some overlap in classes. We talked about this in another class. So I'm familiar with this topic. Maybe I don't even need to read it, or maybe I just need to skim over it quickly just to refresh my memory. Or is this brand new? This is the first time I've ever taken a class like this. All brand new concepts to me, brand new words. This is going to take me a while to read because I'm going to have to spend a lot of time on it. And your attention span. How long can you really focus on university level reading? Which is not like reading a novel for fun, right? It's much more in depth. So are you good for half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour? Most of us after an hour of reading university level work probably find that we're not paying attention so much anymore. So in that case then it's time to take a break. If you're only good for an hour and you make yourself sit there for 3, truthfully, you probably just wasted 2 hours worth of time because you're probably not going to remember anything. Okay? So think about that when you're scheduling your reading. How can I break it up so that I can really focus on what I'm reading and I can really get something out of it, and then I'll take a break and then I'll come back and I'll read it again. Okay? So you want to start immediately with that. So it's a good idea to create a weekly reading schedule. Your classes don't change from week to week. You know that every Wednesday at 7 you have a night class. You know every Wednesday afternoon, for example, you're going to do the reading for that night class. Your Monday morning class at 8:30, you know that every Sunday afternoon you're going to do the reading for it. Okay? So you can come up with sort of a reading schedule where you try to be consistent from week to week and develop a habit where you're getting this reading done. Now the last point here, location should be consistent, distraction-free area. University level reading requires a great deal of focus. It's a lot of new vocabulary, new ideas, new terms. It's written at a very high level. And that really does require most of our attention. If you think that you're reading your textbook while watching TV with your cell phone beside you and you're checking your text messages every 5 minutes and your laptop's over here and you're checking what people are saying on Facebook, you are really not reading anything. And you're really not going to remember anything, and really that's a waste of your time. Okay? We're not really that good at multitasking. We want to be good at doing a lot of things at once, but most of us really are not, especially at the level we need to focus and concentrate for university level work. Now, as I'm presenting this workshop here, a lot of our audience are international students, which means that English isn't your most comfortable language. You may speak many languages, so I'm not going to say it's not your first language, but it's not your most comfortable language, as of yet. And that means for you, reading is going to be that much harder. You're going to have to spend more work on it. Because yes, there's the new vocabulary for the class that everyone is learning, but then there's also other words in there that you may not be familiar with either, that you need to take the time to look up in a dictionary. You need to ask somebody. You need to use a translator. That takes more time and more focus. Okay? So it really needs to have all your attention so that you can be as efficient as possible and effective in your reading and actually retain something from it. So, distraction-free area. Okay, now organize your reading so that the topic that is least interesting to you is done first, and save the topic that's more interesting for later. So let me give you an example. When I went to university, I have two degrees, one of them is in psychology, and during my psychology degree I had to take some history classes. I don't really like history very much, and I apologize to all the history majors, but it's just not really my subject. But I had to take these classes, they were requirements. And so reading my Canadian history textbook was a chore. I really didn't want to do it, it was very difficult for me to do. On the opposite end of that is psychology. I love psychology. I think the human brain is fascinating. And it is not hard for me to read psychology because I'm so interested in it. So when I wake up in the morning and I know that today I need to read history, and I also I have to read psychology, my natural instinct is to tend to choose psychology first because that's the one I like, right? But the better thing to do would be to actually choose history first. Because I'm going to get that done and out of the way before I have done a lot of other things. So before I've sort of tired my brain out by reading it and doing other work. When my brain is fresh, I get the history done and out of the way. And then later in the day when I'm more tired, and I'm not as, my brain sort of isn't as good because I've done a lot of schoolwork, my interest in psychology is going to help me out there. But if I had left the history to the afternoon, when I've already gone to class and I've read psychology and I've done this, and I'm getting kind of tired and I don't want to do it, doesn't it become very easy to say, oh, I'm not going to read history. I don't want to read history, right? Whereas if I'd gotten it done first thing in the day, it would have been done. Okay? So we need to switch that around. Our natural instinct is to do what we like first and save the yucky stuff for later. So switch it around, do the topic that isn't so interesting to you first. Also, point here, think about when you're at your best. Schedule reading that requires more concentration for that time. Now what that means is, what time of day is your brain at its best? For me, I'm more of a morning person in terms of focusing and concentrating and memorizing and all of those sort of university skills I need. For me, that's going to be morning. My worst time of day is about 4 o'clock. Every day at 4 o'clock, I kind of get tired. I'm not motivated to really do anything. So therefore, reading history is a challenge for me. I need to do it in the morning. Now, there's no right or wrong. You may be completely opposite of me. You may be like, 4 o'clock is my best time of day. Morning for me is terrible. It doesn't really matter. But think about, when are you at your best? Focus on the things that require more from you and try and organize them that way. It's a good way to help you be much more efficient in a day, okay? To work with your own body. All right, so now we're going to get into our reading strategy. What we want at university is to read only once. You don't have time to reread anything. You want to get as most out of it you can the first time. You want reading to be an active process, and you want to come up with something that's going to help you later, when it comes time for the test and exams. So the reading strategy we look at is called SQ4R, and it stands for Survey, Question, Read, Recite, Write, and Review. This is a strategy for reading. It's been around for a long time. It's sort of what we call tried and true. So the first one is survey. What survey means is, have a quick look at what you need to read. So we're just going to pretend it's just a chapter from a textbook, all right? So look at the chapter. What is this chapter about? Have a look at the introduction. What is this chapter going to cover? Have a look at the headings in the chapter. What information is going to be presented to me? And how am I going to read it? Is it short? Can I just sit and read the whole thing? Is it long? Should I sit and maybe divide it in half? Does it look like it's going to be a lot of new ideas I'm not familiar with? Maybe I need to divide it into 3 sections. So what's your approach going to be? That's all this survey means. It takes a couple minutes. Okay? Okay, this is probably the sort of the most complicated step of this particular strategy. Q stands for question. And what that means is, before you do the reading, look at the headings and subheadings in the chapter and turn them into questions. Write the questions down and then try to find the answers. This is going to make your reading more meaningful and active. So we're going to look at some examples of that, okay? All right, so here's a textbook, and I just took this straight from a textbook, and in this chapter, one heading is reducing stress. Underneath the main heading, there are 4 subheadings. What is stress? Unhealthy stress reduction, healthy stress reduction, choose your attitude. So if I was going to take these headings and turn them into questions, I think of my question words. Who, what, when, where, and why, and how. In most cases in your textbook, the where probably isn't very important. The who probably isn't very important. What, why, and how are going to be the 3 most important words. So using those 3 words, you turn things into questions. So reducing stress. I might start off with, how can I reduce stress? Why do I want to reduce stress? What does it mean to reduce stress? So what I do now is I think of those questions, and as I'm reading, I want to answer those questions. Now, there's a ton of information in that textbook, but I don't need to know all that information. A lot of it is what is called padding. It's extra examples and so on. I don't need it. I only need to pull out the most important parts, and that's what this strategy is designed to do. Now, the next section, actually, they've done that for us. The heading itself is what is stress. Perfect. When I read the section under what is stress, I'm going to find the answer. That's what I need to know. Now, unhealthy stress reduction. Probably the most simple question is, what is it? What is unhealthy stress reduction? Why is it unhealthy? Healthy stress reduction, I'd use the same questions. What is it? And this time I'd say, why is it healthy? And choose your attitude. What does that mean? So by coming up with some simple questions, now when I read, I'm trying to find the answers. So what it's doing is it's giving me direction. Because a lot of students start at page 1, and they read all the way through to page 40, and quite truthfully, at the end of it, they remember nothing. Why bother?
Congratulations,
right?
You won.
Why bother? So, what we're doing here with these questions is we're deciding what are the most important things. What do I need to get out of these 40 pages? Okay, and we do it section by section. So let's look at another group of headings. I took this just from a psychology textbook. Now, as international students, many of you may not be familiar with these terms, and that's okay at this point. So, the heading itself is Pervasive Developmental Disorders, Autism. The subheadings are Prevalence, Social Development, Language Acquisition, Attention, Perception, and Cognition. So your first step is to find out what all those words mean. Now, if you don't know, for example, if you don't know what the word prevalence means, the first step is to find that out. Okay, and I'll tell you what prevalence means. It means how often does something happen. Okay, that's what prevalence means. But anyway, so pervasive developmental disorders, autism. I always just start with my simple what. What is it, first of all? Okay? And why is autism part of a pervasive developmental disorder? Prevalence. What is the prevalence of autism? So autism is a disorder, and what that means is how often does it occur? Okay? Social development. How does autism affect social development? Language acquisition, same question. How does autism affect language acquisition, and so on? So this is something that is foreign for most of us to do, and it takes time to learn how to do it. But once you can get going with it, it actually will make your reading much more efficient, because it's going to help you learn what do I skim over and what do I pay attention to. All right? And the idea of headings and subheadings is important because university is not about remembering random, independent pieces of information. It is about a synthesis of ideas. So if I were a professor, a good exam question might be, define autism as a pervasive developmental disorder and explain how having autism affects social development, language acquisition, attention, perception, and cognition. This all in itself would make a very good essay question. Okay? So when you're reading, sometimes you have to turn things around and think a little bit like a professor as well. How would this turn into an essay question or a short answer question? Okay, so once you get your questions made, now you're going to try to find the answer. So now you're actually going to do your reading. You're going to do some skimming. You're going to find what you don't need to read, what you do need to read. You're linking information. Remember, it's not about just independent pieces of information. Looking at the big picture. How do things work together? Everything in a chapter works together. That is why it is in a chapter together. And then every heading and subheadings all work together as well. Okay, so you want to keep in mind that big picture while you're reading. And routinely ask yourself, did I understand that? If you've read a section and you at the end of it have no idea what you read, then you need to go back. You need to read it again. You need to look at key words and see what you can do to help understand it. But if you just keep on reading, well, I didn't understand this, so I'm going to read this, and I still don't get it, but I'll just keep going, well, then you've read a whole chapter and not really understood anything and really wasted a lot of time because you didn't get anything at the end of it. Okay? So did I understand that? No. I'll go back and read it again. Maybe I need to pull out some keywords and find out what they mean. But I need to do something to help me understand it. Now, to highlight or to not highlight. Many students, as they read, like to highlight. Now, the question about highlighting is, what are you highlighting for? So let's think about what is the role of highlighting. I have a page of text in front of me. I read it. I take my bright yellow highlighter and I highlight a bunch of stuff. So the point of highlighting, right, is that I can easily identify it later. The key word is later. If you never go back and look at what you highlighted, then really there's probably no point in highlighting. It's to identify things when you look at them again later. So if you're going to go back to your textbook to look at what you highlighted, well then that's good. But if you're never going to go back and look at it, I probably wouldn't spend the time highlighting. Now, when you do highlight, this is what I see students doing. They read for the first time, and they highlight while they are reading, which means they don't know when to stop, because they haven't read it yet. And so they keep going, and they keep going. And in the words of one student, they paint their book. He came to me and said, I'm highlighting and I'm painting my book pink. I've highlighted everything because I don't know what to highlight. And the way highlighting should work is you read a paragraph and then you stop and think, in that paragraph, what is the most important things I should highlight? Is it one sentence? Do I need to highlight one sentence?
Main idea.
Is it, yeah, what is the main idea? It may not be a sentence. It may be groups of words in a couple sentences. So then you just highlight only those groups of words. The goal at the end is maybe only 10% is highlighted. So you really need to think about it. What am I going to highlight here? If it's going to be of value to you later. And then the point is you're going to go back and look at it at another point in time. So you read a paragraph first, you think about it, you highlight key words. It doesn't have to be whole sentences, key words. And then you go back again and look at that later. Now, reciting was the next R. So recite to me means to put words into your own, put information into your own words, to say it over again. Okay? So I've pulled out some key things I think are important. I'm going to say them. I'm going to see if I can say it in my own words. I'm going to write them down. So we created some questions on a piece of paper. I found the answers. Now on a piece of paper I write down those answers. So what is stress? I write down what stress is, for example. I'm going to write down other important facts or concepts that I think might be necessary. I'm going to do it section by section. I'm going to use point form. I'm not going to be copying. Okay, so just a word about copying. I always say to students, I could copy a paragraph in German beautifully, but have no clue in the world what it means. But boy, I could copy it, right? Copying is not learning. Copying is a very passive activity. Here is something here, I'm going to just rewrite it here, and it's not really very helpful in terms of helping you remember anything. It's much more helpful to read it over and say, what are the main points? What is the most important thing I want to write? How can I say that in my own words? Which helps to make sure that you understand it. Okay? So writing is not copying. It's rewriting ideas in your own words. Now, once you've gone through a chapter, what I'm recommending is you go section by section, you pull out key points, you jot them down on a piece of paper, then you're done with the textbook. I would never go back to the textbook. You don't have time when you're studying to go and reread 5 textbooks, right? So we want to spend a bit more time reading it the first time and get some good information out of it, which now we've condensed onto study notes. So you could have typed them on a computer, you could have written them by hand, but you have something that when it comes time now to study for the test and midterm, you have some study notes to study from. It's a good idea to spend a bit of time every week reviewing those notes. So before your Wednesday night class tonight, for example, you'd review the notes from the other chapters. Because what happens is by the time you get to your final exam in April, you're not going to remember what you were doing in the beginning of February in class. A little bit of review each week can make a really big difference. Okay? So put them together somewhere, save them, review them frequently, and then you have them. Now, a lot of students come and talk to me about reading and they say, I want to be a faster reader. That is probably one of the biggest things I hear. And I always say to them, truthfully, it's not about speed, it's what you get out of your reading that is important. Because some really fast readers don't remember anything. And the slower readers spend more time, but at the end of it, they actually remember a lot more. So in that case, it's much more valuable to be a slow reader. So we want to be an efficient reader, but there are things you do to make your reading faster, okay? First of all is learning to identify what can you skim and what do you need to read closely. So let me give you an example. You're reading a textbook and it presents a new concept to you. So it's going to define the concept. Then what it's going to do is it's going to give you probably multiple examples about this concept. Well, if I understood the concept the first time, read the first example, yes, I understand this concept. Really, there's no need for you to read the following 3 paragraphs of examples. You understand it. You can skim over that and move on. Remember I said earlier in the presentation that as you go through your university, you find overlap in your classes. So if you've taken something in another class, you don't need to reread it. You give it a quick skim to refresh your memory and that's it. Little things like you don't need to read the reference information. You don't need to read captions under pictures. There's probably a lot of stuff that you actually don't really need to read. Okay? So there's a lot of padding in textbooks. But the biggest thing is, if you want to be a faster reader, you need to read. It's very simple. If I want to be a better basketball player, and I say to you, I really want to be a better basketball player, but I don't actually want to play basketball, well, I will never get better, right? And the same is for reading. It's a skill. And as with most skills, the more you do it, the better you get. Okay? Because this is a group of international students, you really, really need to spend time reading in English if you want to be successful in university. You need to dedicate time every day to reading in English. It doesn't have to be academic reading. It just needs to be reading. It can be the news. It can be Sports Illustrated magazine. But you need to read. If you truly, truly want to be successful at university, reading is one of the most important skills you need, and you need to practice it. And there's a lot of Canadian students that are not readers either. And I've heard say, well, in all of last year, I read one book for my English class. Well, in 1 year, you've read one book, and now you're going to be asked to read 5 textbooks, plus research, and so on. So there's a lot of Canadians that need to improve their reading as well. But it does get better with practice, okay? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is conclude my presentation, and I'm going to show you a video. If you've been to my workshops before, I've been showing a 5-part video series. It's done by Dr. Stephen Chu, who is a professor at a university in the United States, and he is a psychologist that specializes in learning. So these videos are on YouTube. They're titled How to Get the Most Out of Studying, and the subtitle is, I'm going to paraphrase here, How to Work Long and Hard and Still Fail. Because you can put in a lot of time in the wrong way and not do well. Okay, so we're going to look at part 4 today, where he discusses reading. We're not going to look at the whole video. There's a lot of other stuff that he goes into different types of areas, but just for reading, we're going to focus on the first 4 minutes, and then from about minute 6:08 to 7:45 again. But I do recommend reading them, watching them. They are very good. I've got it.